event.
No, we're just talking.
Sorry. That's all right. I have experience with people like you in audiences. As we start tonight's event, I would like to start by saying welcome to the Winsted Community Bookstore. I'm Charlene Lavoie, the community lawyer in Winsted. There's that troublemaker again. And tonight, we've been doing a series of events here, and we had the booming Winsted Book Festival back in July, and we had some great speakers at that, Ralph Nader and Eric Foner and Peter Vermiglia and Dave Bollier. So we're continuing that tradition tonight with, and this weekend with a few new speakers to Winsted, except Ralph. Ralph's on the agenda for tomorrow at 1. But at 11 o'clock, Bill Curry is going to talk about the election. Oh, can we bear it? I promise you it would be different than anything you're hearing, because it's going to come with a good dose of Bill's humor and perspective on these things. But tonight, we're going to hear from somebody who's new to the Winsted area talking to us. And he's formerly the editor of Salon, and we all know what Salon is, right? The online, yeah, okay. And the digital media fellow for the Wilson Center for Humanities and the Arts and the Grady School of Journalism at the University of Georgia. He's moved back to Connecticut, I think I'm right saying back to Connecticut, and where he's now taken up the position of CEO and publisher of the Connecticut Mirror, the daily online newspaper, a very important publication that is relatively new. It started in 2009 when a group of citizens decided that they were so concerned about the decline in watchdog journalism in Connecticut, and we all know what happened with all the buying up and gobbling up of the major independent newspapers everywhere, including in Connecticut. They started the nonpartisan, nonprofit Connecticut News Project and the online Connecticut Mirror, which I've been a subscriber to since pretty much day one, came in to fill the gap of deep reporting on Connecticut government policies and politics in Connecticut. And it really has filled in the gap so that people, Connecticut residents, can be more informed and more deeply informed about what's going on with their state government. So today, he's not going to be talking about the Connecticut Mirror, however. He's going to be talking about his new book. And we had a discussion earlier of how we were going to address the book, but I'm going to go the Terry Gross way. David said, Terry Gross says, rat effed. So I've been actually saying the whole word, and most people in this audience would understand. They know I would say that. But I'm going to say it because we're going to be on...
the New York Times printed it.
Oh, but this is the way it's published on the book. So, but I'm like, how do you pronounce an asterisk? So, but this is being recorded for community access TV. So I'm going to go with the Terry Gross version and say rat effed. And this is an important topic. This is something that certainly I've been talking and thinking about for decades, because if you just watch politics at all, you can see how gerrymandering has changed electoral politics in the United States, and for the worse, there's no question about it. So it's very heartening to see a book written about the topic, and tonight we're going to hear from its author, Dave Daley, and we're happy to have him here at the Winsted Community Bookstore. Dave?
Thank you. Thank you. This is great. One of the great delights of this has been making public radio hosts to say the title of the book. Oh, and one of the great delights of this as well is being here in Winsted with Mr. Nader, who's been a hero for a long, long time. So I appreciate you having me and hosting me. I grew up in one of those houses where I wasn't raised on Sesame Street. I was raised on the Watergate hearings in the early 1970s. So from then on, the importance and the role of Mr. Nader was made very clear to me at my house. If my dad was here, I wish he had been here too. to see this tonight. You might not have noticed while frantically updating Nate Silver's odds on the presidential race, something really interesting and historic is developing this fall. Democrats have put so many new states in play that Hillary Clinton has multiple paths to 270 votes. He probably has multiple paths to 370 electoral votes. I'm going to suggest that the race for 218 is a more interesting number, that that's the number of seats the party needs to control the House of Representatives, and that the Democrats remains a wild long shot despite the dreams of some liberals this week as the Trump campaign continues its meltdown. There simply are not enough competitive districts remaining for the Democrats to have any realistic hope beyond a wild bank shot of picking up the 30 seats they need to take control. Indeed, this year, it has taken the most unpopular presidential candidate of our lifetime, 2 disastrous debates, an October surprise sex tape, allegations of assault or worse from nearing a dozen women, and an open civil war within his own party's congressional establishment. All of this to even make the prospect of taking back the House seem like something more than a joke. The smartest estimates up to this moment suggest the best Democrats can hope for is a gain of between 10 to 15 seats. If anyone tells you otherwise, you're probably reading a fundraising email from Nancy Pelosi. What's not laughable? What's not laughable is that for the second presidential cycle in a row, Democratic House candidates will get many hundreds of thousands more votes, but dramatically fewer seats. This election is looking even more lopsided than 2012, when Democratic House candidates received 1.4 million more votes nationally than Republican House candidates, but Republicans retained a majority of 234-201. Then House Speaker John Boehner actually claimed that as a mandate from the people to govern alongside Barack Obama. It was not. It was a mandate delivered by brilliant and determined strategists, operatives, and map makers, and now something unprecedented is going to happen. The second presidential election in a row, the party with the most votes may well win far fewer seats. If you want to know how wired these districts are, you can take every result from 2014, you can add 7 points onto every Democratic nominee, take 7 away from every Republican nominee. That still doesn't get you to the 30 districts that Democrats need. Why is this happening now? It's not a coincidence. It's not a mistake. It's because of the gerrymander, the oldest political trick in the book, but one which savvy Republican strategists, bankrolled by dark money and aided by sophisticated new data mapping technologies, reinvented in 2010 and 2011 in a thoroughly unique and modern new way. Our democracy has been rewired at its most basic level. Our congressional districts, it goes a long way towards explaining why our politics feel so extreme, so broken, so needlessly divisive. To understand why this happened, I'm going to start by going back to the election of 2008, which brought Barack Obama a Democratic supermajority in the Senate, as well as a majority in the House. The fourth presidential election of 5, in which Democrats take the popular vote. Go back and watch the live election night coverage. Or don't, I did it for you. And the smartest minds in the Republican Party are despairing over demographic changes that could render them a minority party for a generation. While they despaired, however, a brilliant Republican strategist named Chris Jankowski, the executive director of something called the Republican State Leadership Committee, has another idea. He realizes that 2008, yes, represents a Democratic wave. However, he also understands the truly important election is the election in 2010. That's because the Constitution mandates the redrawing and redistricting of every state legislative and congressional district every 10 years after the census. Elections in 0 years simply mean more. They can reverberate throughout the rest of the decade. Jankowski also recognized that while every state is different, in most states the legislature plays the key role in redistricting. His strategy was so simple and so elegant, it's amazing that people had not hit on it before. You target state house and state senate races nationwide with the goal of flipping legislative chambers and controlling the redistricting process in as many states as possible. Then draw yourselves friendly districts that lock in these gains, even in blue states and purple states, for the next 10 years. In the Wall Street Journal in March of 2010, Karl Rove lays out the plan. Republicans would mount their comeback with redistricting. When you draw the lines, he noted, you make the rules. Democrats evidently didn't get their copy of the Wall Street Journal that day. With 8 months' notice, they could not defend state legislative districts. Karl Rove targeted in flashing neon lights in the pages of the country's largest newspaper. This is a catastrophic strategic failure, and the Democrats' losses would haunt them throughout the rest of Barack Obama's presidency. This is as impressive a political heist as there's been in modern American history. Chris Jankowski and the Republican State Leadership Committee, helped along by the Citizens United ruling that January, which unleashes essentially unlimited dark and anonymous money into the system, would spend only $30 million on a plan they called Red Map. Here in Connecticut, as we well know, Linda McMahon would squander $100 million just to lose 2 Senate races. But when you can inject $100,000 by surprise into a state house race in Pennsylvania or Florida or Wisconsin, especially if you drop all of that money on negative ads in the last month, you can have a devastatingly effective result. Red Map spends $1 million on Ohio state house races, flipping that chamber, giving the Republicans complete control over the redrawing of 132 state legislative seats and 16 congressional seats. Another $1 million in Michigan flips the House and Senate, bringing complete control of 148 legislative districts, 14 more congressional seats. Another $1 million in Pennsylvania, delivering veto-proof control there as well in another blue state. Similar efforts in Wisconsin, North Carolina, Texas, Florida. You can go across the country and see the results of this. It's commonly said that Barack Obama has lost 700-800 state house races under his presidency, and that this is seen as a critique of him. This is a result of what happened in 2010. One election was lost. The gains were locked in for the rest of the decade. Republican strategists pressed their advantages. In Ohio, they barricade themselves into a suite at the Doubletree for months. They call it the bunker. They tell no one where they are. And together, the strategists from the Republican National Committee and Speaker Boehner's political team devised new lines based on unbelievably complicated mathematical algorithms. In Wisconsin, operatives connected to Paul Ryan barricade themselves in a law firm across the street from the Capitol. They claim attorney-client privilege for the people's districts that they are drawing, require even Republican incumbents to sign confidentiality agreements before getting a look at their new districts. In North Carolina, they bring in a master map maker named Tom Hofeller who treats redistricting like espionage. He gives colleagues a presentation warning them never to send a public email, never to leave their computers visible for even a moment. Don't fire the staff before you're sure the entire process is complete. In Florida, strategists conspired an end run around a new state constitutional amendment mandating nonpartisan redistricting by running a secret shadow redistricting process and funneling maps through phony emails, spouses, even former interns without their knowledge. So what happens in 2012? Barack Obama's reelected, Democrats win the Senate, they garner those 1.4 million more House votes. But in the first election run on these new lines, the maps hold in the House. They are the Republican firewall. This is most dramatic on the state level. In Michigan, House Democratic candidates win 240,000 more votes than Democrats. Republicans take 9 of the 14 seats in Michigan. In Ohio, Republicans win a supermajority in the State House despite fewer overall votes, and they take 12 of the 16 congressional seats, 75%, despite the votes being split essentially evenly. In Pennsylvania, Democrats win nearly 100,000 more votes. Republicans take 13 of the 18 seats. This happens in state after state after state. The maps produce exactly the results that the Republicans intended them to. Now, gerrymandering goes back to Patrick Henry. You can trace it back to 1788 and bring it back to the founding of the Republic. Governor Gerry in Massachusetts, who drew lines that looked like a salamander trying to give his party an advantage. Both parties have done it for years, sometimes in cahoots. It's been a useful tool of revenge on an enemy. It's been an incumbent protection racket. It has been useful in gaining undeserved seats as well. But beginning in the 1990s, when the Republicans weaponized the Voting Rights Act and crafted the unholy alliance of African Americans in the South, the gerrymander has become an even more devious tool to govern from the minority. It's more dangerous now because of the technology. Gerrymandering from 1790 through 2000, it's the minor leagues of gerrymandering. But from 2010, gerrymandering jumps into its steroids era. Determined partisan mapmakers have access to volumes of census data, voting records, reams of consumer preferences, as well as powerful computer programs that can instantly calculate the likely result of moving a district line a block in any direction. We look at these 20 districts, we see a Rorschach test, but it's more serious than that because every one of those lines has a purpose and a meaning. These map makers are calculating district lines that are designed to withstand electoral waves. It's the data, the technology, and the ease and certainty with which it can be manipulated that make the post-2010 redistricting cycle fundamentally different from any other in the modern era. As recently as 2006, remember, Democrats rode the Iraq war anger into a political wave that was able to undo a fairly effective gerrymander in 2000. That they have such little hope of doing so this year under stronger and more friendly electoral conditions is a sign of just how effective and enduring these lines are. I'm not sure how well any of this will hold up, but sometimes it's most effective to get a look at what some of these lines look like. This is Pennsylvania's 7th. I don't know if you can see that. People call this the Donald Duck kicking Goofy district because that's kind of what it looks like. The district is really contiguous only where Goofy's foot is going into Donald Duck's rear end. And it bubbles up, it juts out, it reaches up to grab a neighborhood here, a neighborhood there. All of it is completely intentional. If you want to get a closer look at any of these later, I'm happy to show you. Michigan's 14th, I went out and drove every turn of Michigan's 14th, which is an unbelievably convoluted district, which is designed essentially to connect the poorest neighborhoods of Detroit with the African-American city of Pontiac, about 30 miles north. So your goal is to shoehorn as many of the African-Americans as you can in this area into one district. The other districts kind of swirl out kind of like a psychedelic Willy Wonka lollipop off of that, and all of those are Republican districts. And the axis of this district is 8 Mile Road, which runs from the water in Grosse Pointe all the way down, with the exception of one spot where for one block you're not in the district and you drive up into a little cutout that's kind of shaped like a small state of Oklahoma balancing on your finger. And that's Farmington Hills, and those are the population 10,200. Money Magazine really likes it, says it's the 27th best place in the country to live. You are not in the 14th district if those votes were vacuumed out, added to the Republican 11th district. This is precise and it's dangerous. Indeed, in Michigan this year, the latest Detroit News poll shows Hillary Clinton up about 10 points on Donald Trump. Nevertheless, the state's 14-member congressional delegation, there is not a single competitive race in Michigan this year. In Ohio, Hillary Clinton is up a dozen. The classic 50-50 bellwether state that so often keeps people up waiting for the results. 16 congressional states, not a single seat is competitive. By which I mean all of the experts who look and analyze all of these districts have their toss-ups, leans, likely, and the done-fors. So these are done for. In Pennsylvania, it's the same thing. A double-digit lead, you have an incumbent Republican senator who is in trouble. That 13-5 delegation will likely survive. There's one open seat leaning the Republicans' way, but there's one seat in Pennsylvania that folks say that one could swing. Things look even better for the Democrats in North Carolina this fall. Hillary Clinton with a small lead, but mounting trouble for Republican incumbent Senator Richard Burr, a lot of trouble for the state's governor who signed into law the transgender bathroom laws and so many other things, who seems to be down about 8 or 9 points. Tough year to be a Republican there, unless you're running for Congress. Republicans hold 10 of the 13 seats now. How many do you think are in trouble?
None.
Don't have to be Nate Silver to guess the answer. There is a month to go. Very few seats look like solid pickups for the Democrats. But politics aside, the founders designed the House of Representatives to be the part of the federal government that is most directly responsive to the people. Instead, through gerrymandering, it has become insulated from voters. When we have so few competitive districts, it means the only elections that matter are party primaries, and that our representatives essentially become chosen by a small percentage of an active base. This changes the tone and tenor of our politics. It creates campaigns in which no one genuinely tries the art of persuasion, and it sends to Washington politicians with little interest in compromise and governing. Indeed, compromise is the one thing which earns you a primary challenge. This is not easily fixed. Democrats need a national strategy to earn back a seat at the table during redistricting, which means state-by-state local efforts to flip legislative chambers in their direction. They've announced a plan called Advantage 2020 and funded it with $75 million. Republicans then announced Redmap 2020, complete with $125 million. The Democrats will have less money, no order of surprise, and still the tall order of winning on these incredibly tilted maps. Not to mention the fact that all of this makes our politics nastier, negative, more expensive, even our state house races. When our democratic institutions cease to be governed by citizens at the ballot box, they cease to be effectively democratic. I wish I had a happier ending, but I'll take your questions. Thank you.
David, is this the case, even though there's such a significant number of unaffiliated voters, how does that enter in the mix? In other words, how do the districts get targeted when there's so many unaffiliated voters? And also, are there any basis for any legal challenges to this, constitutional or statutory?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that because there's hope in legal challenges. In fact, I think that there might be more hope in legal challenges to undo this than just about any other route. The Supreme Court has never been willing to find a standard for partisan gerrymandering. The last big case that they took was the Veep case in Pennsylvania back in the 2000s, and they said, haven't done this before, we're not going to go there now. Scalia and his side wanted to essentially take it off the table and say, we've never found that this is actionable, so let's say it's not. Justice Kennedy joined Scalia's side, but with his own argument, and he said that, well, you know, I'm open to a standard. If somebody can show me a standard that works, I haven't seen it yet, but, you know, show me something. Which really was all the challenge that a handful of law professors and political scientists and stats nerds needed to try to come up with something. And there's a handful of cases that are making their way through the courts that are designed very clearly at showing him a standard. And now that Scalia is not there, it becomes a little bit easier, and perhaps Kennedy is not the swing vote anymore. I mean, now he, you know, that could simply be the one of many in a majority on this. But there's a case coming out of Wisconsin, there's a case out of Maryland, there's a case in Virginia, there's a North Carolina case. There's a handful of really strong cases that seem like they may have more hope than they've had ever
So before we go to the independent voter aspect of it, are you hopeful, given how much you know about this, that something can wind its way up there and have a significant impact on this?
I'm more hopeful about a judicial remedy than I am almost any other kind of remedy. I love the idea of citizen initiatives and referendums on this, and some of them have been effective, but there are other cases in which they have not been. I mean, if you look at Florida, I mean, Florida passes a really strong, two really strong constitutional amendments, one on the state side and one on the federal side, saying you can't have any partisanship in this process at all. And they found a pretty good way around it. That dug it deeper behind closed doors and, you know, even more nefarious. I mean, Arizona is a pretty good example of a state that passes a citizen initiative because they're trying to make the state's politics less extreme. In fact, it was the Republicans in many ways in Arizona who became most frustrated by how extreme the state's politics had become, because it was affecting the business climate. When you have a state legislature that won't recognize the Martin Luther King holiday and you lose the Super Bowl, you know, that's not something that, you know, the Chamber of Commerce Republicans want to have happen. You see the same thing happening in North Carolina now, when, you know, Bruce Springsteen and the NCAA say, you know, we're not so interested in this. Suddenly, things change. But I mean, Arizona is another example where there's a big difference between bipartisan and nonpartisan. And when you make these committees bipartisan, sometimes you simply have a smaller smoke-filled room. And when you make them nonpartisan in a way that, let's say, California has, you can have more effect on the process. As far as independent voters, really
Unaffiliated.
Sure.
So that you can't tell whether I'm a Republican or Democrat when you're...
I don't need your party affiliation to know which way you lean, because the data is so good. So when they draw these lines with a program called Maptitude, which is an incredibly powerful program. And it comes preloaded with all the census information. So you've already got all this sort of powerful ethnicity and economic and the religion and kind of all of the other information that starts there. Then you factor in everything else on top of that. You can grab the public voting records. So I might not know who you're registered with, but this data is so specific that I know how your precinct block voted in every election, up and down ballot, going back years. So I can look at that block and say, well, in the constable race in 2011, 5 Republicans, 3 Democrats. And you have all of that very powerful information. Added to that the kind of consumer data. I mean, if you zip code data, magazine subscriptions, social media likes, all of this is available for pennies. And when you factor all of this in, I mean, if you watch Two Broke Girls on CBS or if you watch Girls on HBO, you're probably voting for a different candidate. And I can tell all of that when I'm drawing these lines. It's all very, so, yes. Thank you.
You have a lot of polls going on in the country. One is on the minimum wage, and a huge majority of Americans favor
Yes.
a rise in the minimum wage up to $15 an hour.
Right.
All right. They come in all colors and all shapes and all unaffiliated. They're Republicans and they're Democrats, right? Why does the Democratic Party cede that seat by not running anybody on an issue like that? Which would bypass all that you're talking about.
There's somebody in the back of the room who understands the answer to that question much better than I do. I think,
I mean, it's very.
let me bring it around to something that I feel more comfortable with. I mean, what you have is, what you have are districts that have been drawn that, even as the country is becoming more multiracial, more diverse, more small d democratic, that they managed to draw something like 80% of the districts in 2011 to be more white, more rural, and more Republican than they had been, which is a pretty neat trick. And then when you figure how few people actually turn out to vote in these party primaries, you need even fewer people. And I mean, I completely agree with you. There is a big swath of issues on which, whether it is guns or whether it's the minimum wage or whether it's healthcare, there are lots and lots of issues that there is a consensus on, and we're not allowed to see the fruits of any of that consensus because
Because
of
we
this
don't have
gridlock.
candidates
Yeah.
running.
Yeah.
You can
Well,
do it, and you might ask, where are the third parties?
I would love to ask where the third parties. I mean, I think that this process could be taken over in some ways. I mean, in some ways there are so few voters needed that you could take these parties. The Democrats, excuse me, the Republicans pulled this off in 2010 by winning 125 state house seats. 125 state house seats were the key to tip control of all of these legislative chambers across the country that then gave them the power to draw on their own, with no one else in the room, 193 federal congressional districts. 125 state house districts. I mean, if we could organize and win a handful of these, it doesn't take much. It does not take much. But once these lines are drawn, they become really hard to beat. One of the problems that folks are facing this year is candidates look at these districts and they say, well, I can't win there, so I'm not going to run. And you know, donors look at it and say, well, you can't win there, so I'm not going to waste my money on you. There are a lot of seats. I think something like 81% of all of the legislative seats in the country, the ballot access closed essentially in May. So before the folks even knew for sure that Trump would be the nominee and maybe this year it would be different, you had candidates who were saying, yeah, it's not going to happen for me. I'll run for something else. It's locked up on so many different levels, but the key is really, you know, local, small action that can take it back step by step. I mean, in some ways, I think that if the Democrats, and I'm not making an argument here for Speaker Pelosi by any stretch of the imagination, but in some ways, if the Democrats were to take back the House this year, it would almost be the worst thing possible for the party, for small d democracy, in that they would not be thinking about how do we go through the process. They would think it was solved.
Right.
And they would say, oh, gerrymandering in these lines doesn't matter so much. And
They haven't read your book.
you'd have all the pundits would go mad and say, see, it doesn't really matter. You know, in a big year, let things flow one way or the other. And then they would stop putting in the effort and the work to take back state house districts, legislative chambers, to go piece by piece. And then they'll get swamped in the midterms in 2018, and then it's 2020, and it's a census year again. And you're in deep, deep trouble with lines being drawn the next year. It will stay in place until 2031. So there's some real urgency on this.
Well, I think it's also true that the Koch brothers are putting a great deal of money into city council races, county
Yes.
races. They're going to the lowest level of elected officials across the United States.
And by the lowest level of elected officials.
Right. I said that, yes, thank you, David. and I think that's what we have missed, those of
Yeah.
us that were formerly Democrats who now are
Yes.
the Green Party.
Yes.
Just because we want to revolt and we desperately
Yes.
want to take that government. But that's where the money's going. So it isn't even just what you're talking about in the state houses.
It's much
We're
bigger,
talking
yes.
about county by county. And I've
Yes.
grown up in Michigan, and I know Farmington Hills. I'm enjoying listening to you talk about this. Haven't lived there since 1976. So I think that's a thing that we really need to be much more aware of. I don't know how we're going to do this.
No, where's Bernie Sanders on this? Where's a lot of people on this?
Yeah, where's Bernie?
They don't bring it up. It doesn't come up. I mean,
Well, Bernie's got his revolution going, but right now we're not hearing
well,
about it.
a revolution needs to be state house district by state house district, if you ask.
And it's
me.
got to be county by
And
county,
county by
and town
county.
by town.
And or else it's deeply ineffective.
Yeah,
And
so once organized
not
and
done.
once having achieved the gerrymandering successes that they did in 2010, they said, wait a minute, if we're gonna really lock this in, we've gotta pour the money all the way down into
Yes.
the basement.
And that's been a strategy.
We've gotta own the
They're going
foundation.
back decades.
Yes,
And yes.
that's all I know.
Yeah. That's right.
I think people that believe in the Bernie movement think that if this whole revolution took off, it would energize people all the way down
I think
to
you're
the
right.
House. I think most progressives think that Bill Clinton did nothing for the Democratic Party, and probably Hillary won't either. And so, without Bernie energizing younger voters and others, there may not be much of a chance for this to happen down into the state legislature, right?
I think that's right. I mean, with the exception of coming out and having Hillary's back the last couple of months, I haven't heard much of her either.
I just moved down here from Vermont. I lived in Vermont for 6 years, and we're not hearing anything. Bernie just yesterday came out to support Sue Minter, who's the Democrat running against Phil Scott, who's a super popular Republican lieutenant governor up there. You know, the governor gets reelected every 2 years. And Bernie's just, you know, we're like, in the state of Vermont, we're going, where is he? He isn't making votes. He shows up in New Hampshire with Hillary Clinton,
Right.
then he disappears again. You know, he got a lot of blowback on buying that big house in North Hero, and he put his wife in as the chairwoman of the new 501c4, and then he took Jeff Weaver, who had been his campaign manager, put him in as the ED, and a lot of people just got really upset by that. They go, there's not going to be any change here. Bernie, what are you doing? So I can tell you that even in Vermont, there's a lot of concern, like he's disappeared.
So I'm teaching mostly very young 18 and 19-year-olds who, you mentioned earlier about the idea of not even running because of foregone conclusions. and they know nothing about what you're discussing tonight, right? That's not even on their radar. But they already have a sense of that their vote doesn't matter. And so I try to entice them just with a sense of sort of like historical guilt to go ahead and vote anyway, even if, you know, they just sort of mechanically show up just to like sort of be a part of something. But do you have a better answer for me to give to them as to why they ought to show up at a, you know, voting center and cast a vote, even given that they feel so already disenfranchised? And I really don't know what else to say to them besides, you know, I'm going to offer you some incentive to do that because I feel like you ought to go through the motions, whether or not your vote is going to matter or not. No? Okay.
It's not a quick answer.
Well, no, I know that, and they're in an ongoing way. You know, I'm teaching in an election semester, right? And so they're saying, well, why bother? And, you know, if you stayed after the debate to say, you know, this is the first election I can vote in, and I don't want to go. I don't feel like there's any reason, and that's notably because of their
There's
feelings
probably
about
lots
the
of
two.
reasons why they feel that way.
Absolutely.
Based on the top of the tickets. But
Right, but I tried
I
to
think-
argue,
I think-
right.
what you're saying, you have to look at these down ballot races. You have
That's,
to look at
I
these
say
local
those
races.
words,
You
yeah,
have to
yeah.
look at these state races and,
Right.
and everything else, and they matter deeply. And I mean, I don't want to rhapsodize about civic duty. I think people probably share that.
Isn't it more like the, you know, the shin bones connected to the ankle bone?
Yeah.
You know, it's all connected. You can't just look at it separated out
We don't
from.
hear about anything besides presidential elections. You know, it's not really even on their radar.
And that's one of the
you know?
reasons why we're in this mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, because Democratic or progressive voters didn't turn out in 2010 so much, and it turned out in 2014 so much. And if they don't turn out in 2018 again, it'll set the Republicans in an even better position for 2020, which is an extraordinarily consequential year.
But isn't this such a
Voter
complicated thing for
turnout-
them to understand? It's such, you know, they're even just entering voting. To even suggest that they even understand it at this level, I feel like they'd be even more frightened. They'd be like, oh, forget it then, right?
Voter turnout can swamp these lines.
Mhm.
If there's one thing that can swamp these lines as well, in some ways it's voter turnout. And a lot of these lines, I mean, I like to use Pennsylvania as an example because it's just so deeply gerrymandered. The Democrats win their races in Pennsylvania with over 70% of the vote. Republicans win theirs with 57, 58% of the vote. So by taking more seats and by spreading their voters out, they have spread themselves a little thinner. Now, the technology means that they used to call it a dummy mander, when you would spread yourself out so thin that you would then lose in the first bad year. The technology makes a dummy mander a lot harder than it used to be, because you know who turns out, you know a lot about them, and you can draw stronger lines as a result. So a district can look 51-49 competitive and not be 51, you know, but you know that it will actually go 51-49. And in Texas, they got 3 new House seats off of the census in 2010, and they essentially had to be drawn as minority seats for the Latino community. And the Republicans were able to draw them in such a cutesy way that they actually won those seats. So they're majority Latino districts, but they knew which Latino neighborhoods turned out to vote and which ones didn't, and they were able to draw them in such a way that they won all 3 of them. Now there's 3 Texas seats that, if you can turn those voters out, you could swamp those lines. So, you know, I would certainly impress that it matters.
David, 2 quick questions. Which states do it better, like Iowa? And in your book, you talk about the unholy alliance between the Republicans and some minority districts that make it even easier for the Republicans do what they do, because 150 state legislative seats is rather small number to overcome. So which states do it better, and talk about the unholy alliance?
I love Iowa. I could keep you here for hours talking about Iowa redistricting. I won't. But it's amazing. Iowa has this, I went and drove around and talked to a lot of people there. They have a real civic belief in the importance of redistricting there, and they take the fact that they have a nonpartisan committee of government bureaucrats that does this very seriously. Voters love it and believe in it. Politicians of both sides fear crossing this committee of bureaucrats because they will face the wrath of voters. I've never come across more popular government workers than you do of this Iowa board. They take it very, very seriously, and they draw all of the state house and senate districts without taking any politics into consideration. It's a little bit easier. It's a squarer state. It's a whiter state. You don't necessarily have all of the same pressure on it. But there is a sense of civic pride that they have fair elections and that they want competitive elections and that they want to have arguments and conversation and elections and debate. If everybody adopted the Iowa model, if everybody took redistricting as seriously as the citizens of Iowa did, if politicians elsewhere feared rigging the lines in the same way that Iowa politicians fear it, you would have a very different situation. It's really interesting. The Speaker of the House in Iowa was a guy named Paulson, and the Senate President was a guy named Gronstel. I know I promised I wouldn't keep talking forever about Iowa redistricting. But they, the two of them, amazingly, are two national leaders within the Republican State Leadership Committee and the Democratic version of it. So they love going to other states and trying to sow this kind of havoc, and neither one of them would dare do it in their own state, which is kind of amazing. I mean, I think Iowa's got the best model by far. I mean, California has a pretty terrific citizens panel in which you have to go through a really detailed application process and write essays and everything else if you want to be considered to, have the trust of drawing lines out there. It's not completely insulated from politics, but what you get is a result that seems fairly close to representation. The unholy alliance. When Ben Ginsberg, who you probably still see on TV right now as the Republican attorney on a lot of these matters, he was the Republican attorney in Bush versus Gore. He's been around for a long time. He took over as legal counsel of the RNC under Lee Atwater, and Atwater told him on his very first day, he said, "We're going to do something about redistricting." And the plan that Atwater and Ginsberg hit on is to use the Voting Rights Act, which when it was reauthorized in the early 80s by the Reagan Justice Department, it was reauthorized in kind of a tricky way. They said, wherever you can, you have to draw majority and minority seats. So the Republicans saw an opportunity in this. There was still very few African Americans in the House of Representatives. So they said, they understood that if you were to pack as many African Americans and Democrats as you could into as few districts as possible, you would thereby bleach all of the surrounding districts and make them whiter, and you would take them all. There used to be such a thing as the white Southern Democrat, or the white liberal Democrat. There are now, I believe, 2 white Democrats left in the South. David Price in North Carolina, and there's somebody in Tennessee. And this was deeply effective. Ginsburg and his allies built alliances with African American lawmakers in the South, and they said, "We will help you get seats. We will get more seats, but you will also gain." And so in 1994, when Gingrich and his gang of thieves take over the House, what you see is the highest level of African American representation in the House of Representatives essentially since the Reconstruction. The Congressional Black Caucus, which was really non-existent, begins to grow, but that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of the Democratic Party losing control, and those new members being relegated essentially into a permanent or at least long-term minority. Now, it may well be that it was a good trade for some of them who probably believed that they would never find their way to Congress otherwise. This is not to minimize race in the South or racism in the South or any of those things, but it was a very complicated deal. Republicans used their financial resources essentially to work with the Democrats in these states to draw districts using much more primitive computers and aptitude programs that would give them districts, and they took all the rest.
So how does our state of Connecticut here fit into this overall picture, do you think?
Connecticut has a fairly standard redistricting process. I should know more of the details here than others. I believe that there is a commission. I think it's a fairly bipartisan commission that draws these. And there's been, so little competition, I think, on the state level as far as between the 2 major parties that it has been. I don't think anybody's stealing a seat or anything. I'm not even sure, if you were to get fancy, I'm not even sure how you would do it and try to draw a Republican seat in the state. You'd have to probably...
There are none.
Yeah, it would be pretty hard to do. I imagine Massachusetts is probably a state where occasionally there's been Republican members probably going to do it up there. But here, it just hasn't. I don't think it's been all that controversial here because it's so hard to, other than the Chris Shays and I guess the Nancy Johnson and McKinney, you probably only have those 3 going back. No, Rob Simmons, I guess, for a little while, but there's not many.
So does that mean that here in Connecticut, if we want to do something about this, we need to pay more attention to these appeals that come in from other states?
Yeah.
I usually just click delete because I think, I can't handle, trying to understand.
When you get an appeal from North Carolina right now, pay attention to it. Because, all of this stuff that's happening in North Carolina right now, all of the polls are so in one direction. What you still have in North Carolina is a state house that is so wildly gerrymandered that there's a supermajority for the Republicans off with fewer votes. And they're not even hoping that they can take back the majority this year. They're only hoping that they can win enough seats in the state house to get rid of the supermajority. So it's serious.
Many students live in residence outside their hometown or outside their home state. How does that factor into the problem? where are they allowed to vote? Are there uniform rules across the state? Or does it vary?
Voting laws on this get so convoluted and complicated, and they all essentially, happen at the state level. And I think that's been another piece of this. I think that gerrymandering is a big piece of what has happened, but that you have also then had gerrymandered legislatures that change voting rules, that reduce voting hours, that change the rules on absentee ballots, that shut down early voting days, that make it harder to register, that make you show up with an ID. And again, it's not partisan to say which side is doing this, because I think in 21 of the 22 states that have introduced new restrictions on voting this decade, that they share something in common as far as who is running those states. It's, I look at this and I think that it becomes an active plan to try to govern from the minority. If you can reduce and make it harder to vote, you make it easier for your side to win.
Pretty easy to turn it around, isn't it? How many people would you think getting active in these key state legislative districts? You're talking about 150 seats. They flip to get their advantage. And there are thousands, right? Thousands of seats.
Didn't take much to do it. It was a really audacious plan. It didn't take much to do it. I think that that's the beauty of this in some ways, is that if you can organize locally and if you can do politics at a local level, you have the ability to really affect and drive this. It was a simple plan.
It's just a matter of Republicans had more energy than the Democrats who were caught in the ditch.
They had more energy and they had the idea, and then they went out and executed it, pulled it up. And the technology is so good that it makes it really hard to undo. It's a perfect storm, yeah. Thank you so much, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So David did bring a few copies of his book, so if you're interested, I'm sure he'll sign them
Absolutely.
for us too. And the other thing is, if you haven't been here and you're not already on the bookstore email list, just jot your email down and do it legibly. What happens is some of these emails aren't getting to people because you can't, like this very first one.
That's me. Can I read it? All right.
Okay. So straighten it. Because we'll just keep you informed of events like this that are happening at the bookstore.